Hello, everybody. Today we are very pleased and honored to have Dr. Gallia Lindenstrauss from Israel in our Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East series after the Gaza crisis and the Gaza conflict, which is ongoing actually. It's not after. Unfortunately, it's an ongoing conflict. And today we are going to have Gallia Lindenstrauss with us because it's the right person. It's, I think, one of the most knowledgeable person in people in the area and beyond, who is dealing with what is happening in the Eastern Mediterranean, particularly on who's dealing with the Turkish-Israeli relations. And she's the editor of the one of the most prestigious newsletter journals, the strategic assessment, sorry, of the Institute of National Security Studies in Israel. As we know it, we are the old people, the Jaffa Center,
Right.
as we know it. I reveal my age now, but anyway, and also it was I. This is my personal view, and I can share with you. Perhaps Gallia, you are disagreeing with you, but anyhow, whenever we would like to hear a sober and very well analyzed view from Israel, we are turning to your institute, and I think this is true for both of the characterizations, both sober and well analyzed. So without further ado, I'd like to give you the floor to open up your presentation about the Turkish-Israeli relations vis-a-vis Syria, and of course the Eastern Mediterranean. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm very happy to be part of this e-lecture series. I think it's very important for the audience here and the audience also later on that listens to the recording to present all the complexities in our region, which indeed has gone through such an event, and as you said, it's still ongoing. And as you mentioned, my area of expertise is Turkish-Israeli relations. I will now present to you this issue. I will present a bit of a background, although I know we are all quite knowledgeable about this issue, but just to bring us to the opening point, to discuss the current crisis in Turkish-Israeli relations after the Gaza war started, and this new dimension that entered into play when Assad fell in December 2024, and the fact that now Syria is a major part of the crisis between Turkey and Israel. So with your permission, I will share a presentation I prepared. Sorry, I think it's this way. I hope you can now see it.
Yes, it's okay.
Very excellent. Okay. So just again, a very brief background. I just want to say that we all know about what is called the honeymoon years in Turkish-Israeli relations in the 1990s, where really relations were between Israel and Turkey were very close. But it should be mentioned that also in the early years of Erdogan's rule, also he continued with this good atmosphere between Israel and Turkey. And indeed, this relationship reached heights. For example, in this picture, you see Israel's president at the time, Shimon Peres, and he was invited to speak in the Turkish parliament. And this was the first time an Israeli statesman was allowed to speak before a Muslim majority country's parliament. So that was quite a big of a deal. And even more, I think, substantial was the fact that then Prime Minister Olmert basically gave Turkey a role in negotiations, indirect negotiation between Israel and Syria at the time. He gave Ankara a mediation role. And actually, he in his memories, he says that Erdogan played quite a useful mediator between the countries, but things went downhill when the first operation in Gaza broke out in late 2008. And we know from since then that Gaza has been, every time there's erupts violence in Gaza, this also negatively affects Turkish-Israeli relations. And the first very public manifestation of such linkage between the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and specifically Gaza to Turkish-Israeli relations was when President, at the time Prime Minister Erdogan, left the joint panel with President Peres in Davos. And that was quite a remarkable event. And later on, of course, we had the Mavi Marmara, in which Israeli Navy also, there was Turkish civilians killed on board the ship that was part of a flotilla that was meant to supposedly break the siege over Gaza, and only on this ship there was violence. But anyhow, this resulted, of course, in this was very unfortunate event in which people died. If I have to give you a visualization of Turkish-Israeli relations in the last 15 years, then we already talked about the flotilla crisis. Actually, even worse was at the time when there was the Palmer report published. The Palmer report was an investigation of the flotilla crisis, a UN sponsored effort to try to investigate the flotilla crisis. The report basically stated that the maritime seizure on Gaza was lawful, but that Israel presented access violence, and these results were not. Turkey didn't want these results to be publicized, and they were leaked to the New York Times. And actually, this at the time, the diplomatic relations in 2011 were downgraded between Turkey and Israel. It took 6 years to repair the damage that was done during the flotilla crisis. First, Netanyahu apologized in a phone conversation to Erdogan about the event. And later we had a normalization agreement that also included elements of compensation, of monetary compensation for the event. But less than 2 years after the normalization agreement was signed in 2016, there was again a crisis. The crisis was in part over Gaza, and in part over the US decision to move the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It was under Trump's first presidency, actually. And we had again a crisis in relations, and basically Turkey expelled the Israeli ambassadors. It didn't do it in the diplomatic way, but in practice it expelled the Israeli ambassador. Again, it took a few years to return to a normalization between the countries. This time around, Israel was very suspicious of Turkey, and it took quite an effort from the Turkish side to convince Israel to normalize relations again. But again, this normalization lasted less than 2 years, and once October 7th war broke out, relations went downhill and to the worst level to the worst crisis we had in Turkish-Israeli relations. Just again to remind you that the 2022 normalization was relatively serious, even compared to the first normalization. There were public dimensions of it. In 2016, basically Erdogan and Netanyahu spoke in separate press conferences about the normalizations. This time around, we saw the Israeli president come to Ankara and get all the protocol of being welcomed in Turkey. We also had the Israeli ambassador present its credential to the Turkish president again, but giving it a lot of visualization and not something that is behind closed doors. And this was in contrast to the 2016 normalization. And for some, it was an indication that actually this normalization this time around was more serious than the previous one because it had this public element. But we know that Erdogan, throughout even this short period of normalization, sometimes had very negative also statements against Israel. So there was a question, who is the real Erdogan? The one who is pragmatic towards Israel, who does normalization with Israel, or the one that talks very critically of Israel and is basically seen, and sometimes his criticism sounds like Israel's worst enemies. When we try to explain who's the real Erdogan and what does Erdogan really feel about Israel, then one thing that can help us is the WikiLeaks cables that were publicized. And one of these WikiLeaks cables comes from the Israeli ambassador, who talks with the US ambassador. And he basically says that contrary to what some analysts say, that Erdogan is operating because of political needs or because of domestic consideration, he actually, the Israeli ambassador at the time, said that he thinks that Erdogan simply, or what he writes here, are discussions with contacts inside the Turkish government and outside, makes it feel that Erdogan simply hates Israel. It's a matter of really personal distaste to Israel. And when you look back to why Erdogan does not like Israel, then we see that throughout his upbringing, the fact that he learned in religious school, his close relations with the first Islamist Prime Minister of Turkey, Erbakan, it's clear why he has these. It's very hard to get out of Erdogan's upbringing and not be against Israel. Although, again, if you look back, at first he called anti-Semitism a crime against humanity. Of course, he also links this anti-Semitism with Islamophobia together and says that both are crimes against humanity. But there is some nuance, let's say, in his attitude towards Israel. Anti-Semitism, of course, is a global problem, not unique to Turkey, existed in Turkey before the rise of Erdogan. But it seems that under his rule, it was more mainstreamed in the sense that it was more acceptable to say these views. People with these views were promoted, got more public time in the public sphere, in commentaries, in the news reports, in TV. So it was more mainstreamed under his rule, and this can again explain to us part of his issues with Israel. So it's a deep mislike of Israel. When he cooperates with Israel, he does it because he's more attuned to his pragmatic side, not because he likes Israel. This very short normalization between 2022 to 2023 was a year in which, unfortunately, Turkey suffered this devastating earthquake. But Israel was quick to react, and as should be in our region, when there are natural catastrophes, the countries step to assist one another. And just, I'm going to go to a side note, but just this week, when there was a big fire in Jerusalem, near Jerusalem, there was already, Netanyahu already spoke about Greece as a possible country that would help. Luckily, the fire was contained and Israel did not need outside help. But this view that when we are in the same region and when natural catastrophes occur, we help each other, then Israel really operated quickly, swiftly, sent a relatively large mission, the second actually largest foreign mission to Turkey at the time. And this was well received in Turkey. Also, only very close to October 7th, on September 20th, 2023, we actually had the first meeting, face-to-face meeting between Netanyahu and Erdogan. This was very notable because, again, both these people have been a long time in power and they have a lot of suspicion towards each other. But they had this rather supposedly friendly meeting on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly at the time. If you know, there's the Turkish house near the UN, and Netanyahu went to the Turkish house to meet Erdogan, which also I think means goodwill on the Israeli side. And supposedly they were also talking about gas issues. So it was, I mean, it looked like it was positive. But very quickly into the war, basically Erdogan does not show any sympathy to Israel. And more importantly, basically says that Hamas is not a terrorist organization. What he did to Israel is not to be condemned, and goes into his vicious rhetoric, comparing, for example, Netanyahu to Hitler, etc., etc. And this, of course, creates a lot of anger in Israel, because there are actors in the international system who did rethink their attitude to Hamas after what the atrocities Hamas did on October 7th. But Turkey stands towards Hamas, seems to only have, actually its cooperation with Hamas seemed to only have strengthened after October 7th. And this is, of course, from Israel's point of view, very problematic, especially after what has happened. And also the fact that Turkey basically lets Hamas operate from its territory. It's not the pushing Hamas to operate against Israel, but it's turning a blind eye to Hamas activity in Turkey, which we know a lot of it is orchestrating terrorist attacks in Israel and in the West Bank. What also made the crisis worse is that Erdogan's political weakening. Erdogan, of course, is still in power, and just now we had the protests in Turkey, and he seems to have overcome them. But if you look at it comparatively, he is losing some of his political powers, and we did see this, first of all, in the general elections in Turkey, the last general elections in which we had to have a second round for the presidency. He didn't win the first round. But also here in the local elections, if you see the red places, these are places where the CHP, the Republican Party, had won. And this is, of course, the main opposition party. And also it won the big cities. It maintained control in Istanbul. And Erdogan, who was once an Istanbul mayor, knows the importance of Istanbul. So definitely Erdogan wanted to learn why he did so poorly in the local elections. And one of the explanations was the fact that trade was continuing with Israel. And basically, if you see this ad that was going around during the campaign for the local elections, you see that, in Turkey, you stamp to when you vote. Then you see here bullets that basically they were saying that the fact that Turkey continues trade with Israel is helping Israel in its war effort, and that in practice Erdogan speaks very vocally against Israel, but basically he's hypocritical, and the fact that he's continuing to trade with Israel means that Israel can sustain the war effort. And indeed, in May 2014, because of public pressures, Turkey decided to suspend all trade with Israel, meaning there were no Israeli exports to Turkey and no Turkish exports to Israel. And this is quite a dramatic decision for two reasons. One, that till then, Erdogan managed to differentiate between economics and politics. And this was also not only regarding to Israel, also in the bad years between Turkey and Egypt, also trade only expanded. So this was one notable aspect, the fact that till now he didn't touch the trade, but in this crisis he did. And the other thing is that Turkey and Israel are quite significant trade partners, at least from Israeli perspective. Turkey was one of the big trading partners of Israel. In 2022, and this is actually a low estimate, but there was $8 billion mutual trade. The Turks talk even about $10 billion mutual trade. It depends how you count it. And in 2023, it was also going very well until the war erupted. We were talking about a $5.7 billion mutual trade. And as you see here in the graph, you see here in the blue is Israel, Turkish exports to Israel, and the red is Turkey's exports to the Palestinians. So this is according to the statistics coming out from Turkey. So I think these statistics have been politicized, so take them with a grain of salt. But anyhow, definitely trade has decreased between Israel and Turkey, and no direct trade is happening between Turkey and Israel. All Israeli exports to Turkey stopped, and Turkish exports to Israel are coming to Israel, but not directly. Some are coming through third countries, including Greece, and some have come through the Palestinians. I mean, this increase in Turkey-Palestinian trade can only be explained by the fact that some of this trade is going to the Palestinians, but later on resold to Israel. At some point, the Turks understood this and they stopped this way of exports to Israel. But in general, we still do have exports through third countries from Turkey to Israel, but it varies between a quarter to half of the trade that existed before the trade ban. So this has been quite a decrease. And now enters Syria. Basically, throughout the Syrian civil war, Turkey was mostly interested in what was happening in northern Syria, and Israel was mostly interested in what was happening in southern Syria. And basically, there was no major conflict between the countries. If we look at how Assad fell, we have to say there were two main reasons for that. One was the fact that Israel weakened Hezbollah. If Hezbollah was not weakened and Israel would not have targeted Nasrallah, then nothing would have changed in Syria in 2020, in late 2024. So first of all, it was the weakening of Hezbollah that was a big supporter of Assad and military supporter of Assad, and that was one element. The other element, of course, that explains the toppling of Assad is the fact that Turkey sustained a rebel movement, different rebel militias in Syria, and although they were successes for Assad, and at the end the rebels were mainly concentrated in Idlib, still Turkey enabled these rebel groups to continue to operate and be in opposition to Assad, and hence Turkey is seen as the winner of what happened in Syria because it betted on these rebels, and its logistical help, of course, made it possible for them to operate the way they did against the Assad regime. So these two elements, in a way, it was an indirect cooperation between Israel and Turkey to the toppling of Assad. But of course, these two countries see the situation very differently. For Israel, it is still, first of all, Israel, like other countries, still is not sure what is going to happen in Syria. Will the new president manage to take control over all the country? He still does not have this control over all the country, especially in the northeastern parts of Syria. Israel is concerned, of course, because of the jihadist background of Ashara himself, but also the people surrounding him. So even if Ashara went through a transformation, Israel is not sure is concerned that there will be a jihadist threat from Syria towards it, and of course the other element is the understanding that Iran, although this was a big loss for her, the fact that Assad fell, Iran has not given up Syria, and Iran has not given up Syria as also a way to transfer weapons from Iran to Hezbollah. And Israel doesn't want to see this transfer of weapon reemerge. And also, Israel doesn't want to see, of course, Syria itself strengthening in ways that will cause it problems. Israel wants to maintain its freedom of action in at least certain parts of the Syrian airspace, and this is causing problems. In this tweet, you see a screenshot from a Turkish television, and this is, I would say, a maximalist Turkish ambition that is presented here, but there are ideas, concrete ideas of Turkey to build bases in Syria, not only to strengthen Syria's military for its own purposes, but to have forward defense bases for its own interests, for its own security. And again, this, I think, is a maximalistic view, and also the person who tweeted this thinks it's a maximalistic view that Turkey will have 7 bases in Syria. But even if it has less bases, but they will be located in southern Syria, that is a big problem from Israeli perspective. Ideas that are floating, and again, I don't think this report holds much water, but the report that Turkey will give its S-400 to Syria, I don't think Turkey would do this, but the idea that Syria will have air defenses, as some analysts claim, the only reason Syria needs air defenses supposedly is against Israel, and that's, of course, from Israel perspective, very problematic if Turkey would assist Syria in air defense realm. Turkey, of course, is not only interested in Syria for security reasons, although this is very important, and this is also very important from Israel. But where I think the two countries differ is that Syria is also very important for Turkey for economic reasons and for energetic reasons. Basically, Turkey wants to have a role in Syrian reconstruction. It wants that Turkish companies will be involved in Syria's reconstruction. Turkey doesn't have the money to pay for this, and there will be outside actors that will supposedly pay for this. But Turkey is very much interested in the reconstruction contracts in Syria. It wants to have transport routes to Syria and also energy routes to Syria. This is from another Israeli think tank's work of a researcher named Eli Rettig, who looked at the energy projects Turkey plans through Syria. And one of these plans, this is not new, it was also talked before the civil war in Syria, but of a Turkish-Qatar gas pipeline. And there are other ideas, also energy-related ideas. And I think this map, and here it relates also to the Eastern Mediterranean, we have to understand this map as Turkey's frustration and Turkey's wish to present alternatives to the IMEC, this idea that there will be energy and transportation link between India, the Gulf, Israel, and then later Cyprus and Greece towards Europe. Turkey was not included in the IMEC idea, and Turkey has two ways to bypass or to present again an alternative to the IMEC. One is through Iraq. They're building what they call the development road. But also now with the new opportunity with Syria, Syria is seen as a way that Turkey can have its dream of being an energy hub and transportation and trade hub. Things will be through Syria. So I think this map is not only about the Turkey-Qatar gas pipeline, but we're talking about a greater element of Turkey's desire to be not cut off from ideas from transportation from Asia through the Middle East to Europe. Another element, and again, it relates very much to the Eastern Mediterranean, is, of course, the fear that I think is in Greece, in Cyprus, and in Israel, that Turkey will sign an economic waters agreement with Syria. Like the one they did in Libya, this will be an agreement that disregards the law of the sea. Like the one with Libya, this ignores important islands like Crete and Rhodes. Also, this one will ignore the rights of Cyprus, and we know there's a lot of dispute on these issues. And but if such an agreement would be signed between Turkey and Syria, that of course means all the Eastern Mediterranean will be an area that we will have the same problems like we have with regard to the Turkey-Libya, or at least the Turkey-Libyan faction Turkey signed with agreement. And as you know, this is causing problems. It caused problems with regard to the East Med gas pipeline. That maybe was an ambitious idea that anyhow had problems, but this was an issue. And today with the interconnector that is being built first between Greece and Cyprus and later will be also linked to Israel, this is creating an atmosphere that of course Turkey's claims are completely against the law of the sea, but it is creating problems. So this is, I think, is a big concern. This Twitter account, this Turkish century, relates to the fact that Turkey has entered into its second century since the Republic declared independence. But and this account is a bit with overconfidence in Turkish capabilities, but I think it does present the possible challenge from what happened in Syria and the way Turkey sees it as an avenue to its strengthening. The current foreign minister in Israel, Gideon Sa'ar, is quite pro-Kurdish. Israel had traditionally very good relations with the Kurds of northern Iraq, but with the PKK and its affiliates, it was different. Basically, in the past, the PKK cooperated with the PLO in training camps in Lebanon. So, of course, this was not an actor Israel wanted to cooperate with. But today, the attitudes also towards the Kurds in Syria is changing. Also, you have to say that inside Turkey, there is a process of that the PKK might give it. The PKK leader has said that the PKK should give up its arms. So the PKK itself is in transformation. But anyhow, Israel, I think there's now what is different also from the PYD, this PKK branch in Syria, to what happened in the past is its willingness to be out of the open with Israel, which was something we didn't see in the past. Again, it's basically it's diplomatic support and Israel pressuring the US not to completely withdraw its forces from Syria. As you know, US currently has 2,000 forces in Syria. The Pentagon has just stated that this would be reduced to half, but actually this reduction is not that dramatic because we already, before the downfall of Assad, these were the numbers. We had 900 US troops supposedly in Syria. So this decrease is not that big, and as long as the US forces remain at some amount, then they still have an effect. And Israel, of course, does not want to see the withdrawal, and neither do the Kurds. The Kurds will be very much affected if the US withdraws from northeast Syria. And we have the comparison of Trump's current administration to the previous one. And in his previous presidency, he was not involved in Turkish-Israeli relations. He really there was the cut in there was the crisis in 2018, and he was part of the issue because Erdogan warned him not to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, that it will hurt Israel-Turkish relations, and he didn't listen to that. And in general, his administration in the first term was not interested in what was happening in Israel and Turkey. They saw other issues as much more burning issues. But this time around, I think it's different. They feel that the level of tension in Syria is high between Israel and Turkey. It's also the first time, yes, Turkey was always very supportive of the Palestinians, but this is the first time that it seems like we're more close to a bilateral confrontation between Israel and Turkey. In the past, Turkey's support for the Palestinians is like a third party. It's not a direct issue against Israel. And so we had this press conference just recently when Netanyahu paid a visit to Trump in Washington. And basically Trump says he likes Erdogan and that he can help repair things between Turkey and Israel. But he says as long as Israel is reasonable. And since he said Israel should be reasonable, Israel has operated less in Syria, much less than before. And also we've had talks in Azerbaijan, between Turkey and Israel. So we have basically two mediators currently, and they're in cooperation, of course. One is the US, and the other is Azerbaijan, which Israel has very good relations with. And Netanyahu is expected to visit Azerbaijan next month. And Azerbaijan is basically using the fact that it has very close relations with Turkey and has good relations with Israel to be the venue in which talks are happening between Israel and Turkey. And hopefully the sides will get to some understanding about deconfliction rules. Israel has experience with that with Russia regarding Syria about deconfliction rules. The problem, I think, if you compare what's happening now to what happened between Israel and Russia, is that Turkey is much more ambitious with regard to Syria. Russia wanted to maintain Assad in power. Turkey really has big ambitions regarding Syria in the long run, and hence the game is more expensive. Or Turkey's, in terms of the balance of interest, Turkey has more interest in Syria than Russia ever had. And I think that's a big issue that Israel should take into consideration. I'll stop here, and I'm very happy to hear any questions.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. So you gave us a whole view of the Turkish-Israeli relations. My students will love it because they will have everything, and we all love it because it is actually very substantive what you said about the course of the relations. I can use the prerogative of let's say the elder of the commitment and ask you a couple of questions. The first question is whether the support of Israel for Kurds, the Kurds in Syria, is a strategic one or a tactical one. I mean, I believe that, or not a believe, but I have the impression that Israel is doing what its enemies have done all the way. Is supporting non-state actors in the region. One of them are the Kurds in Syria. The other, perhaps, is the Druze in Syria. So there are non-state actors, perhaps armed non-state actors that are now getting the support of Israel. And I'm going a step further. How much ready? What's the probability of Israel substituting, replacing United States in protecting the Kurds in Syria? I mean, when I say protecting, saying what he said, what Israel said about the Druze, that whoever is hurting the Druze is going to have Israel, is going to confront Israel. This is the first question. Second is, what's the probability of what do you think is the probability of having let's say what we call a hot conflict between Turkey and Israel in the shape of what you have between Iran and Israel the last year? And what's the probability of having a condominium in Syria between Israel and Turkey?
Thank you for the both questions. With regard to Israel relations with the Kurds, first of all, the problem, of course, is that we sometimes people exaggerate this element because they talk about, not you, but in general, they talk about the Kurds. They link all the Kurds together, and of course, it's very different if you support the Kurds in Iraq and the KDP than if you support the PKK, and people really tend to exaggerate the story. There's a lot of conspiracy theories.
I'm talking about the Ph.D, not the
yes,
PKK.
Yes, you're talking about the Syrian branch of the PKK, and I mean there were elements of more. There are elements of diplomacy that we didn't see in the past. There was a phone call between between our foreign minister and the foreign minister of the Syrian administration, the autonomous administration of North East Syria. And this is not something we see in the past, but I think again it's mostly or 99%. I think it's diplomatic. It's the idea is that basically Israel will help the Kurds in Washington in the sense that just I mean, the U.S. knows it's itself. It's a very small force compared to other U.S. deployed forces in the past. ISIS is still, the fear is that with this instability in Syria, there will be a resurgence of ISIS. There's still ISIS detainees that the Kurds are guarding, and the Kurds are saying that if we'll have to fight Turkey or Turkey-led militias, we won't be able to guard the prison. So there's a concrete issue for why the U.S. is there. Israel doesn't need to explain to the U.S. why to stay there. The U.S. knows it's itself, but since Trump in 2019 declared that the U.S. will withdraw forces, and in general, Trump wants to see a reduction of U.S. forces abroad, There is a fear that these forces will be, there will be a withdrawal, and hence Israel is voicing its objection and supporting the Kurds and saying that this is something that should not be done. That's the main element, I think, that is considered, this diplomatic route is what is considered with regard to the Kurds. You're right, of course, that Israel traditionally has a policy towards minorities and supporting non-Arab minorities in the Middle East. But I think the comparison between the Druze and the Kurds makes it even less likely that Israel's support to the Kurds would be militarily done. Basically, the Druze are close to Israel. There's a Druze community inside Israel. The Druze are divided between Israel and Syria. So the way to assist, it's very easy logistically to assist the Druze. There's more logic to this policy towards the Druze. This is also the area of South Syria is much more affects Israel's security than North Syria. This is not an area that directly affects Israel's security. So the policy towards Druze is much more makes much more sense. And even in this policy, I have to tell you that there are question marks. For example, there was an idea that the Druze would be able to work in Israel. Druze from Syria would be able to come daily commute to Israel to work, and this idea did not later translate into reality. So even with regard to the Druze, there are limitations, and if I take this with regard to Kurds, I think it's quite limited. Chances that this will be any military support. So I don't think the comparison is correct that Israel would do to Turkey what Israel's enemies do to Israel. And I think there's no comparison at all between Turkey's support to Hamas and what is happening currently between Israel and the PYD. With regard to the chances of a direct confrontation between Israel, a direct military confrontation between Israel and Turkey, I think that's the concern. I think that's why Trump jumped in to intervene. He wouldn't have done it. I mean, there's Ukraine, there's Iran, there's a lot of issues before Israel and Turkey, and he would not have stepped in to say what he said to Israel's prime minister in Washington, that he can help and that Israel has to be reasonable, if there was not fear that things might deteriorate. I think the first phase of such a deterioration would be an accident. That's why you need the confliction. It wouldn't be on purpose, but once it will happen by accident, the chances are that things would later deteriorate more. And again, maybe it's just a security dilemma. You know, the actors are acting out of defensive motivation, but we know that security dilemma can result in unfortunately state deteriorating into conflict. If the U.S. is serious about stepping in between Israel and Turkey, I think there can be found a solution. Turkey is much more ambitious with regard to Syria than Israel. Israel thinks about Syria only in security lens, doesn't think about it in any other lens. And if its security concerns will be dealt with, then supposedly it has no interest in Syria. Turkey is a different story. Turkey is much more interested in Syria, as I said, for economic reasons and for transportation reasons and for energy reasons and for, in general, influence in the Muslim world. And hence, I don't see a condominium in the sense that it will be Syria would be divided between these two countries. That I don't see.
Stavro, would you like to go?
Yeah.
No.
So thank you very much for a very informative presentation. I really appreciated that you went to the trouble of explaining the history of Turkish-Israeli relations before going into the current state of affairs, because it's very important to see not even the golden age, the first decade of Erdogan in rule, where a trade balance between both countries was still at an excellent level and growing. So my question is more on the domestic side of things in Turkey and the previous elections. From what I gather, the main reason why Erdogan went ahead with the the ban on Turkish products, Turkish exports to Israel was because the New Welfare Party from Fatih Erbakan won third place, basically, in the elections. And the tip of his spear during the electoral campaign was that, as you said, Erdogan was only throwing words at Israel. He wasn't doing anything of note. So what I remember was that, at least at first, Erdogan went ahead and banned 70 or something products, construction products mainly, to Israel. So what is the current state of affairs of the trade balance today? Are those bans still going on? Is there some lax with regard to what's going on with other products? Is there some sort of black market going on?
Thank you for the question. Yes, you're right. I didn't elaborate on the talk, but the first stage was yes, a ban on certain products. It was, and as you said, mainly construction. But it was quickly, this was not enough for the public. As you said, there was a demand, and it was not only coming from the left opposition to Erdogan, but this was coming from, the Islamist parties. It was coming from the right. And hence Erdogan paid attention to it. And in May, he announced a complete trade ban on Israel. This doesn't get enough attention, but there's a complete trade ban on Israel, meaning also you can't get Turkish shampoo, Turkey laundry detergent, Turkish cars. There were manufacturers, Asian manufacturers, Toyota, Hyundai, that have plants in Turkey, and these cars were coming to Israel, and they're not coming anymore. But trade people, they find routes when they want to, and so some things are getting through third countries, and one of the countries is Greece, that is helping or not helping. I mean, this is private initiatives. This is not something that is governmental, and some products are arriving to Israel through third countries. But the trade has not resumed to its previous levels. It depends on the period, but we're talking only of a quarter or a half of the trade that existed before the trade ban. So it's been quite substantial, and it's only, by the way, it's only Turkish exports to Israel. All Israel exports to Turkey have stopped. Anyhow, Turkey was the side that was more enjoying trade between Israel and Turkey. 3/4 of the trade before the eruptions of the October 7th war was Turkish exports to Israel, and only 1/4 was Israeli exports to Turkey. But yes, it's been significant in the sense also that Turkish products that are arriving to Israel are more expensive because they're coming through third countries, or there are additional costs to what has been before. And till now, this has not stopped. We also don't have flights between Turkey and Israel. And it used to be Istanbul, Tel Aviv was one of the most lucrative lines of Turkish Airways, for example. Not only Turkish Airlines was flying, but also the low cost of carriers of Turkey. And also in the very last period, there was a resumption of El Al flights to Turkey. And so it's been very significant because this was the people-to-people exchange. This was a sort of a lobby that was keeping the relationship alive. And now there's not much left to Turkish-Israeli relations, not much elements that can stop the relations from deteriorating further.
Thank you. Zakia?
Yeah. Thank you again for the magnificent lecture. It was really informative. I would like to ask a little bit regarding I understand that the Turkish-Israeli relations have gone a lot of ups and downs, but much of the trend seems to be about the public diplomacy. So it's about publicly condemning Israel, and then it's publicly normalizing relations. And as you pointed out, it's a lot about the show. It's a lot about making a large statement, and that's really interesting. However, I mean, and you explained that having this public diplomacy, having this, this, like, more of like, how diplomacy is projected outwards, and we have the people-to-people that is lost, and to some extent the economic strain. But what about the military and the intelligence part? I mean, before, the golden age between the two was very strong, particularly in the intelligence and the military and security field. Those communication channels are very much entrenched in the history of the two countries. How far would you say they've been affected, or like during all this ups and downs? I mean, you said about Turkey supporting Hamas, but that also is on a superficial question. In a superficial level. It's not like Turkey is providing Hamas something more. I mean, definitely not more than Qatar or Iran or other countries. I mean, it's just not condemning Hamas like Israel would expect. But in essence, other than some public relations, all this, for the show, bling bling, not much is going on that front. But much less is known on the security and intelligence. If you would like to comment on that, I would appreciate it. Shed some light.
So thank you. You're very correct that Israel and Turkey enjoyed or had strong military relations in the 1990s. And also at that time, the conflict with the Kurds was very hot, and some countries would not sell Turkey military equipment, and the Israel defense establishment sent or defense industries sold to Turkey at the time things Turkey needed. This changed after the first operation in Gaza, the cast-led operation in 2008, when basically Erdogan said no more. And also Turkey now has its own defense, very sophisticated defense industries of its own, so it doesn't need to buy things it used to buy from Israel. And so military relations stopped around 2008. There were some defense deals that were completed, but this also ended around 2010. So all the element of military cooperation stopped. There are periods in which Turkey also blocks Israel's cooperation with NATO. It happened after the flotilla event for a few years, and now it's also happening that Turkey blocks all Israel's cooperation at any level with NATO. And just recently there was a drill related to earthquakes, which is, this is the topic we can all unite around, but Turkey objected Israel would cooperate with NATO. So all this element of military cooperation has long been gone in this relationship. There was intelligence cooperation that did continue until until before the war, it continued. But this was mainly to foil terrorist attacks. There was very concrete Iranian attempts to harm Israelis in Turkey in 2022. And the fact that this was foiled by cooperation between Israeli and Turkish intelligence organization was actually something that built the trust between Israel and Turkey and led to the 2022 normalization between the countries. So intelligence continued, but it was again against terrorists, concrete terrorist attacks. And the current foreign minister of Turkey, Hakan Fidan, when he's in his previous hat as the head of the MIT, the Turkish spy agency, there was cooperation under. This is also now he speaks very criticizing Israeli very harshly. But at the time, for foiling terrorist attacks, these relations proved useful. In general, I think Turkey, because of its the importance of tourism, really doesn't want to see nobody operating, not Saudis, not Israelis, not Iranians, on its soil. With regard to Hamas, the story is a little bit more complicated. It's not just the fact that they are diplomatically endorsed by Turkey, and Turkey says that Hamas is a legitimate political actor. It's also that Hamas operatives, some of it, are operating on Turkish soil. And we know that Turkey, when it wants to stop things, it can stop things. I'm not saying that the Turkish government is pushing them to operate, but things are happening: money laundering, acquisition of arms, planning of terrorist attack. All this is happening on Turkish soil. And one, I didn't mention it, but it's important to state that one of the concerns of Israel is that Turkey would allow, or again, only turn a blind eye to Hamas activity, future activity in Syria. That Hamas will use Syria because it will remain unstable, perhaps, will use Syrian territory again for strengthening, re-strengthening, rearming, and operating against Israel from its northern border. That's a concern. Now, I said this is not all. I mean, this starts the fact that there are Turkish. Sorry, that there are Hamas operatives on Turkish soil. This starts actually when there was an Israeli abducted soldier named Gilad Shalit, and much before October 7th, and when he was released, Israel demanded that some of the prisoners would be expelled from Gaza and the West Bank, and Turkey agreed to receive them. And they laid the grounds later for Hamas activity in Turkey. But we know a lot of every time there is a publication about the foiling of a terror attack in Israel. Usually you see this person had some links to Turkey. Either he got things from Turkey, or he was for a period in Turkey, or he permanently resides in Turkey. There's a lot of Turkey connection to Hamas's terrorist activity in the West Bank and in Israel.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think Stavros has a follow-up question.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, actually.
Rounds.
And after Stavros,
we're closing
I would like
after
to have two intriguing questions.
You can go ahead, Professor Roussos, if you want.
Well, just two questions. Is that there are very journalistic and futuristic questions. Do you think that could Turkey ever accept? I mean, ever accept Gaza fighters if there is a deal for Gaza fighters evacuating Gaza, Hamas fighters evacuating Gaza?
I mean, also in this current, the last hostage deal, the prisoners that were released of Hamas, 15 of them went to Turkey. Also in this
not only that, I'm saying that if there is a deal like the 1982 one with Arafat, who left, the fighters of the PLO that left Beirut to Greece and then to Tunisia and Algeria and Sudan. Do you think that Turkey could be a country that could accept the Hamas fighters if there is a deal for an exodus of Gaza fighters? The first is this.
I mean, I have a hard time seeing such a deal, but I don't think Turkey would be the country that would accept them.
Right.
We know that when there was now talk a few months ago that Hamas leaders would be expelled from Qatar, and where would they relocate? It was clear that it's not so easy for Turkey to be the one that is accepting them. And I think it's also related to I mean, we still have the Syrian refugees issue in Turkey, which I should have mentioned in my lecture, but this is a big issue in Turkey. And in addition to the Syrian refugees, now to accept a large quantity of Palestinians, I think it would not be acceptable for Turkish public opinion. Although, speaking in general, Turkish public opinion is sympathetic, very much sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, but I think that would be too much for. And also, you know, there's the Palestinian cause and there's Hamas. So the Turkish public, I think, is 99% sympathetic to the Palestinians, but support for Hamas is around 30%, which is still too high from Israeli perspective. It's too high, 30%. But again, I think it would be hard for the Turkish public to accept these people.
And my second question is again a futuristic one. I have the feeling, which is just a feeling, that the next leader of Turkey might be Imamoglu. the whole track of his. It reminds me of somebody who is prepared to be it's not a conspiracy theory. It's that's prepared by the circumstances to become a leader. Do you think that if we have a personality like Imamoglu, I'm not saying Imamoglu himself, but let's say Imamoglu, would change the relations, the status of relationships between Israel and Turkey?
I mean, Imamoglu has also voiced criticism towards Israel. So criticism of Israel is not only something Erdogan does, but is more general. But I think if Imamoglu or somebody else from the opposition comes into power, there will be a more open discussion in Turkey. There will be more people who today are who will not say that we should have pragmatic relations with Israel. Who cannot say this today will be able to say this. And once the public sphere will be more open, and again, complexities will be brought back to the game, and not only populistic, simplistic propaganda against Israel is constantly voiced in Turkey, I think the picture would be a bit better. As long as Israel doesn't solve its issues with the Palestinians, that's a problem. That's a problem also in Israel-Greece relations. It's not a problem we only have with Turkey. But if Trump succeeds and brings about a normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which by essence will have a Palestinian component because the Saudis will not go ahead without a Palestinian component, that would be a good background for a change of stance also in Turkey towards Israel, and especially if there will be a change in leadership in Turkey.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions. I think they're going to be the final ones because we've been going for more than an hour. So
we're really sorry, but we're enjoying this.
Thank you. I'm enjoying it too. Thank you.
So my first question is related to the great tweet you shared from 30th century with hold my tea, hold my beer, with regard to the maximalistic views of Turkish foreign policy, Turkish strategy. So it's well known that the public milestones for the century of Turkey are the next two milestones are 2053, 600 years after the fall of Constantinople, and 2071, 1,000 years after the Massacre battle. So in an alternate viewing of the future where Erdogan and his successor, not Imamoglu, someone who is born from the same cloth, and keeps this sort of Turkish maximalistic view in play, where would Israel stand in this Turkish view? Would Israel always be considered a Turkish foil, a Turkish enemy that will be used as a scapegoat for any and all domestic and foreign priorities? And my second question is related to Trump. We see that Trump is trying to sort of deal with both Turkey and Israel, as he always does. But do you see and he sees both countries as potential markets, whether we're talking about Gaza or whether we're talking about the deep Turkey, let's say, as potential market. If Trump at some point needs to choose, who do you think he would choose? The biggest potential market or the market closest to home? So those are my two questions.
Two big questions in quite different directions, but I'm happy to answer them. One is about what are Turkish grand aims. Okay, we know what are the more tactical aims and what are the more close security related concerns regarding, for example, the Kurds, and that Turkey doesn't want to see jihadist resurgence in Syria because Turkey really suffered from jihadist terrorism in the past. But what is Turkey's grand vision, and then this Turkish century? What is? And as you know, Greece knows, and as Israel knows, Turkey is a regional power. It doesn't need to prove itself as a regional power. That it already does. Nobody disregards Turkey that it's a regional power. Some of the things it's doing, its bases in different countries like Somalia, like Qatar, and like things it's now doing in Niger. That and the fact that it's building an aircraft carrier, it already has a vertical aircraft carrier, but it's building now a regular aircraft carrier, means that it has more global ambitions. It's not only, I'm not saying it's going to be a superpower, but it's playing on the big field. It's at least that's its ambition. I'm not saying it will succeed, but this is the level of ambitions. And if that's, and for Turkey, Israel is in, if it has maximalist aims and maximalist ambitions, then Israel is a problem. And I don't see that changing as long as these are big, ambitious aims of Turkey. The only thing is when you're in such a competitive environment, such as the Middle East, where you have a few regional powers, each of one of them also with capabilities and not to be disregarded, each one for its own reasons. I mean, the backlash to these Turkish ambitions can be a coalition against it. Like we saw an informal coalition against it, or at least it was isolated during the years 2019, 2020. If Turkey annoys too many actors in the area and in the adjoining regions, I think we will see the reoccurrence of this isolation we saw in 2019, 2020. But in general, the answer to your question, that I think in this maximalist vision of Turkey for the Turkish century, Israel is a problem. It's not something you can align with. With regard to your question about Turkey, Israel and Trump, and who will Trump choose? Well, it's very dangerous to try to analyze Trump, because he operates in ways that we're not accustomed from other leaders. But I would say till now, basically Trump sees Erdogan both as someone like him, as a strong leader, as a leader he can cut a deal with. And also he's very impressed by Erdogan's success in Syria. And Erdogan likes successful people. And hence, I think he has more inclination to accept more demands of Turkey with regard to Syria than of Israel. I'm not saying he's not attentive to Israel's demand with regard to Syria, but I think he thinks that Turkey should get more with regard to Syria. So in this respect, I would say regarding Syria, I would bet on Erdogan.
I insist.
Thank you very
Please,
much.
can
We
I
have
have
one
the
final question from
last
Zakia.
question?
One final question.
I'm so sorry, and we promise we're going to close, but this is a
No,
You are
great
one of
opportunity to
the
have you.
most
I'm happy
popular
to-
one in terms of
I'm happy
questions.
to
I can tell
become-
you.
Yeah,
I can tell
I
you.
mean, because I've been coming and going a lot in Cyprus, and there's a lot of activity there in terms of Israeli buying real estate. And of course, that's, no biggie when it comes to the Greek side and in Europe and all. But there's interesting activity on the occupied territories, right? On what Turkey calls northern Cyprus. So there is actually, from my understanding, from what I've been reading, I haven't had a chance to go and survey myself, but there's been a community building there. I mean, we have not only real estate buyers, but we'll have a lot of people, establishing their lives there. And I'm not talking about the Greek side. Do you think that community, I mean, there's a rabbi there since over 2 decades now that has a community, his family, and, it's becoming vibrant. So I was wondering whether, do you think that this migration, let me put it this way, in that part, would actually play a role in the Israeli-Turkish relations? Because, I mean, if you see like what's been happening, Turkey has been denying any activity on, on the side that they control and everything. But there is a community. Nobody can deny there's people there, and do you think that will play a role in this in bilateral relationship in terms from people to people perspective, as you mentioned before?
So first of all, despite the efforts of the Israeli foreign ministry, there's a lot of ignorance about the situation in Cyprus and the risks of buying property and the illegality of buying property in northern Cyprus. And so it's unfortunate that the Israelis are buying their properties, but I can, but your question relates to a community, and here I have to say I haven't heard much. I know there is a Chabad presence there, and in general, I mean, rabbinical diplomacy has been helpful between Israel and Turkey in the previous normalization attempt. We saw that this coalition of rabbis in the Muslim world has helped, has been also influential in the normalization between Israel and Turkey. So these people can be of assistance. I think this is still, I understand why from Cypriot perspective and Greek perspective it's a problem. But it's not comparable to what is happening in the Greek side of Cyprus, which there is really, you're right, Israelis have discovered Cyprus not only as a tourist venue, but also as a real estate venue. Real estate in Israel is very, very expensive, so Cyprus is a good deal compared to real estate in Israel. And also people, unfortunately, we have also some negative migration now from Israel because of the political situation and the war situation, and some people find it very comfortable to live in Cyprus because they can still work remotely with Israel and then fly from time to time. So Cyprus, yes, has been proven very attractive to Israelis. But with regard to your question on the community in Northern Cyprus, again, I haven't heard much about it, so I don't think it's a huge phenomenon. But diplomacy by rabbis, I must say, sometimes it works. Yeah.
Thank you. And yes, that was the last question. Thank you so much for your patience, for your brilliant presentation. As Professor Russo said, we really hope to have you here in Athens to host you in one of our live events. And if you pass by, please let us know. Thank you very much again.
Thank you for your patience and for your and wishing you and the audience a lovely weekend.
Have a nice weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.